Thank you, dear.
Thank you.
That lovely introduction, my goodness. She asked me, she said, well, do you want to go out there and sit in the chair while I do the introduction? And I'm always amazed by that because what are you supposed to do? Sit there and go, yeah. Yeah, it's all about me, yeah. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. There must be nothing to do in Hoover this morning, huh? You guys must be really bored or something like that. But and probably the first thing on your mind right now as you look up here is go, why is the cowboy here for Southern Voices? I'm not even from the southern part of Wyoming either. I'm from the northern part. I guess the southern Montana is about as close as I can get. But I do have another secret weapon like that allows me to speak on this particular subject. And it's beautiful, too. Like, I love the background and I love the name, Southern Voices. It summons up something very specific for me, like that, because my mother was from West Virginia. And we kind of grew up as one of those families that told stories. My mother was really good about that. We didn't have a whole lot of money, and so we grew up on front porches, talking, on rocking chairs, talking, sitting across campfires, talking. And I thought, as a little bit of an homage, like that, I hope you'll allow me, like that. I'm going to do a little bit of a departure this morning, first thing, simply because my mother passed away just last year. And she's constantly on my mind like that. And one of the reasons is because I kind of cut a lot of my storytelling teeth from her abilities as a storyteller like that. And I have to tell you that one of the best stories I ever heard was actually one of my mother like that. And I'd like to tell you that story actually this morning to kind of kick things off here at the Southern Voices Festival like that. My mother used to always call me once a week like that just to kind of check in and tell stories. And my wife would always laugh because she made me laugh harder than anybody else on the face of the earth like that. And I think one of the main reasons for that was she had no shame, none whatsoever. There is no shame in our family because of my mother. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a little bit kind of an illustration of what it is to be an author, what it is to be an artist. I mean, you really kind of have to be shameless to a certain extent. You really have to go out onto that thin ice and tell things, and let people know things about you that maybe even your closest family members and anybody else don't know. But my mother, not a person to hide a fact that, like, if something happened in her life that most of us would deem as very embarrassing and try and hide under every circumstance, my mother would get on the phone and suddenly Radio Lily was on the air, okay? And so I'm sitting there one evening like that, and the phone rings, and my mother calls like that, and I'm dying laughing, falling off the sofa. She's telling me this story like that, and my wife Judy is like, what's going on? What's the matter? And I just handed her the phone. I said, you've got to hear this from the horse's mouth. You can't hear this from me. And so I handed her the phone like that, and my mother went on to tell her the story like that. And the story goes like this. My nephew, the 6'4" man-child, was going away to college like that, and he was away at college, and he had a small apartment, but it was within driving distance of where my mother lived. And so what she would do is she would go and drive over there at the end of the week and fill up his refrigerator with groceries, do his laundry, all these things. This is a service I would like to point out that she did not provide for my brother and I, okay? Anyway, she would go and do all of this stuff. Well, she gets there, she loads all the groceries and everything into the refrigerator. She gets that done, she gets ready to leave, and she looks, and of course, the sheets are gray, the towels are moldy. And I'm looking out here, and all the mothers are nodding their heads, going, yeah. So anyway, she gathers up all the laundry, she takes it home, and she does the laundry, and she thought to herself, I don't even know if he has another set of sheets or towels. I should probably take these back and remake the bed and do all that for him. So she drives back over to his apartment, gets all this stuff done, gets his, his towels all hung up, and she says, if I leave these sheets on the chair beside the bed, they're going to be here when I come back next week. So she goes in and she makes the bed. Well, she's making the bed, and she's trying to get this fitted sheet, at the curse of modern existence. She's trying to get this sheet put on this mattress, right, this fitted sheet. And she gets to the last corner, and the last corner won't go on. And she can't figure out what's wrong. And so she reaches around up underneath there, and there's something in the corner of the sheet. And she pulls it out. It's a pair of women's panties. And she's like, oh, you dirty little bird, you. And so she says, figures, I'm going to teach him a lesson. And so she takes the panties and she hangs them on his mirror, on his dresser, so that it will be the first thing that he sees when he comes in from work that night. And then she goes home, and I think she's sat on the phone the entire time. And so she waits, and the phone rings like that, and she says, hello, and she says, hey, Mama, thank you so much, for, doing my laundry and and all the groceries and everything, and making the bed. That was really above and beyond the call of duty. And she waits a second. She's setting the trap here, and she's like, "How do you like that little gift I left for you?" And there's a long pause, and he goes, Mama, why'd you leave your underwear hanging on my dresser? Now, most of us would hide that story. But she tries to tough it out. She tries to be brave and tough it out. She's like, well, what makes you think that's my underwear? And he says, well, Mama, because the girls that I date don't wear that 6 cotton panel I'm expecting an assassination attempt underwear. Anyway, now you know whether the acorns don't fall too far from the tree. Like that, so we're all kind of guilty as far as that's concerned. I have to put my cowboy technology up here so I know what the heck it is that I'm doing and don't run out of time, because that's my biggest trick, is to run out of time. My name is Craig Johnson. I am the author of the Walt Longmire series, and I come from a town of Ucross, Wyoming. Population 25. 23 today because my wife Judy and I are here. And we did turn out the lights when we left, but it's kind of a fun thing for me, to talk about these type of things and to be in different geographic regions to talk about these things. I've been writing the books for about 12 years, and generally, whenever we start off one of our tours, we start them off at the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody, Wyoming. It's up in the northeast corner up there next to Yellowstone, and if you ever get a chance to go to that museum, you most certainly should. It's absolutely amazing. But we kick off the tours there and then take off and fly out of Billings, Montana, because that's the largest town close to where we live, and my wife won't fly on the planes that fly out of northern Wyoming, because they're the kind where they give you the leather helmet and the goggles and say, hang on, that kind of stuff like that. So anyway, we were going to leave, going from Cody and heading up to Billings to fly out. And this is just a little illustration as to how my life has changed a little bit since Hollywood kind of got a hold of me. It was kind of funny like that, but we were on our way up there. My wife knows that traveling with me is somewhat like traveling with a trained bear. As long as the bear stays fed, we'll all be okay, And so, we stop in, and there's a little cafe in Red Lodge, Montana, and we stop in there to get something to eat, and I go in and we're having something to eat, and we get ready to leave, and when I'm not wearing one of these, I'm wearing one of the Absaroka County Sheriff's Department ball caps that we sell on the website, and they're like a brown ball cap, with an emblem on the front that says, Absaroka County Sheriff's Department, and if you didn't know there was no 24th county in Wyoming, if you didn't know there was no such thing as Absaroka County, they look very real. And so I had one of those on, and I go up to the counter, and I'm writing the check for lunch, and the woman looks at me and she says, "Where'd you get that hat?" And she said it real aggressive-like, and I thought, oh no, she thinks I'm a real sheriff's deputy, and somebody's dined and ditched, and I'm gonna have to go chase somebody down the main street of Red Lodge, Montana. And I look at her and I point at my head and I said, "It's not a real county," and she goes, "The hell it's not, it's Walt Longmire's county." I felt like I'd been smacked. So I looked at her and I put my best winning smile on. I go, "Well, I'm Craig Johnson." And she goes, "So?" I said, "Well, I'm the guy that writes the books that the TV show is based off." And she goes, "What books?" And that's when that little voice in the back of my head started saying, "You should just go now. Just give her the check and leave, okay?" But my ego wouldn't let me do it. And I said, "Yeah, the TV show that's based off of my books, like that." And I'll never forget her response, like that. And she's, "There are books?" And so I told Viking Penguin that whenever we went on tour from now on, that was going to be our motto: "Yes, there are books." Like that. So. But it hasn't always been that way. It didn't start out that way. Whenever I first started, the very first book in the Walt Longmire series is a little novel called The Cold Dish, which is, it's lovely that we have this wonderful bookstore here to sell the books. But I've got the first copy of The Cold Dish. I sat down, and people always ask that question. They always say, "Well, how did you get started as an author?" And there are only two honest answers to that question. The first one is that you stumble onto a story that you think is worth telling, something that's different, something that you think is worthwhile, maybe never been done before. And then the other one is you run out of excuses. You finally get to the point where you're like, okay, that's it. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this book. And I'd kind of reached that point. Like I'd built, my ranch. I'd built this little cabin. It was about 24 by 36. I'd poured the concrete, stacked the logs, all of that, because I had one of those fathers who thought that you were slaves, slave labor until you escaped, And so anyway, I built this little portion of the house. Finally got it, the doors and windows in, and got the heat on so that my wife wouldn't freeze to death during a Wyoming winter, and sat down and I wrote the first 2 chapters of The Cold Dish. My very first, Walt Longmire, my very first book. And I wrote those 2 chapters, and they were horrible. They were really, really bad. And I thought, why are these so bad? Why are these chapters so bad? And I thought, you know what? You don't know enough about the practicality of Wyoming law enforcement. You don't know enough about sheriffing, which is a very specific form of law enforcement. I mean, it's the only elected law enforcement official in the United States. It's the only time that a policeman actually has to be a politician. And so I thought, you've got to go find out about this stuff. As everybody knows, you go do, practical research on these type of things. You got to go find somebody. Because the most seductive words in the English language are, tell me a little about yourself. And so I thought, I got to go talk to a sheriff is what I got to do. So I drove the 18 miles into Buffalo, the county seat, and I get in there. And this is before 9/11, so there was no, computer room. There was no bulletproof glass. There was none of this stuff. And so I go in, and there was a wooden counter. And I look at the end of the hallway, and there was a door propped open, and there's a guy sitting in there with his cowboy boots up on the desk. And so I, knock on the counter, and this voice goes, "What?" And I said, "Hey, Sheriff, could I talk to you for a minute?" And this fella comes out. It's a fellow by the name of Larry Kirkpatrick. And he comes out like that, and I'm looking at him because I don't want a 6-week wonder. I want a guy that's been doing the job for a while. And he'd been the sheriff there in Johnson County for something like 18 years or something. And so I said, "Hey, my name's Craig Johnson. I've got a little ranch out near Ucross, and I'm writing this murder mystery about a Wyoming sheriff, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me out with this." And he said, "Well, come on back to the office." And so I walked back into his office, and there are bookshelves on his office walls. And I got to tell you, with the success of the books and the TV show here in the last 12 years, I've been in a lot of sheriff's offices, purely on a professional basis. And and I got to tell you, not all of them have bookshelves in their offices, okay? So I took this as a good sign. I thought, this is nice. This will work out. And so, I go in, I sit down, and I explain the whole situation to him, and he says, "Well, I don't know, if I'm going to be much help to you in this, because I've never done anything like this before." And I said, "Well, I'm not looking for literary criticism. I'm looking for, the physical aspects of how it is that you would, process a homicide investigation, in a rural state." And so we talk about it a little bit more, and he says, "Well, sure, what the heck, I'll help you out. I'll give it a shot." Well, I walk out of there, and I was so pleased that I had solved my problem that I went home and added on to my house. Then I built a barn and corrals and loading chutes and a shop and all these other things, and added on to my house again. Finally, I came back in one fateful day and I go into the office, and I pull open the third drawer down on the right-hand side, and those 2 lonely little chapters of The Cold Dish are looking up at me, and 9 years had gone by. Yeah, so I don't want to hear any of that crap about writer's block, okay? I don't want to hear any of that. And so I pull those 2 lonely little chapters out, and I start reading them, and they were just as bad as I remembered them being, 9 years previously. And I thought, you're going to have to go in, and if you're going to start this thing all over again, you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to reintroduce yourself to this sheriff all over again. And it was going to be really embarrassing. I knew he was still the sheriff because I'd voted for him 3 times. And I thought this is going to be really, really embarrassing, to go in and do this again. And I hadn't worked up the nerve to do it. But I went into town, and I was putting diesel in my ranch truck. And all of a sudden, this cruiser pulls in on the other side of the pump island and stops. And this guy gets out, starts fueling up his cruiser, and he kicks his hat back, and he drops his Ray-Ban sunglasses down on his nose, and he kind of folds his arms and looks at me like this. And he's giving me this look that I've seen before, which is one of those looks that says, "When did I arrest you, and what was it for?" So I'm looking at him, and I thought, oh boy, it's going to be even more embarrassing than I thought, because it's going to be in public. And I step over, and I stuck my hand out, and I said, "Sheriff Kirkpatrick, you're probably not going to remember me, but my name is Craig Johnson." And he goes, "You're the one that's got the little ranch out near Ucross, and you're the one that's writing the mystery novel about the Wyoming sheriff." This was a 5-minute conversation from almost 10 years previous. And I looked at him, and I said, "That is absolutely amazing." And he goes, yeah. If you don't mind me saying so, this book is going kind of slow." Well, that pissed me off. So I sat down and I really jumped into it. I mean, I really got into it because I was angry. I thought, okay, I've never been stopped by anything before in my life. I'm not going to be stopped by this. So I sat down and I wrote the very first draft of The Cold Dish, the very first Walt Longmire book. And I think I made a mistake that I think a lot of beginning authors make in the sense that, I thought, what, if I get this published, I'm never going to get another book published, so I better put everything into this thing. The first draft of The Cold Dish was 650 pages long. It was like War and Peace in Absaroka County. It was what it was like. But I got the thing done, and I was really kind of proud of myself. And I sent the thing off. And one of the first things I did was I gave it to my brother, and I gave it to my mother and father to give them, let them give a read to it. I got to admit, that one of my favorite quotes is the one from Wallace Stegner on Teaching and Writing Fiction, where he says that there's no greater piece of fiction than the disclaimer at the beginning of every novel that says nobody in this book is based off of anybody alive or dead. What a crock that is, right? Okay, I'm from a town of 25, okay? I'm from a state that only has 500,000 people in it, all right? So I'm kind of at a disadvantage already, okay? So anyway, I sent the thing off. I give it to my brother. I give it to my mother and father. My brother, I call him up on the phone after he's got the book, and I said, hey, have you read that manuscript I sent over? And he goes, yes, I have, and you're dead. I said, what do you mean? He goes, Craig, the old sheriff that Walt goes and plays chess with on Tuesday nights, that's our dad. I was like, crap, I thought I hid that really well. And he goes, no, he looks like Dad, he acts like Dad, he talks like Dad. The only thing you did was cut off one of his legs, and I don't think that's going to fool Dad. So I said, I got to go. And he goes, I bet you do. So I hung up, and I called up my mother and father. And my mother answered the phone because my mother was always the one that answered the phone. And I said, Mom, have you guys had a chance to read that manuscript I sent over? And she goes, oh, yeah, honey, I'm about halfway through. I mean, she's my mom. What's she going to say, right? And so I said, has Dad read any of it yet? And she goes, oh, yeah, he's about 2/3 of the way through. And I was like, he's definitely read the Lucian parts by now. And so I'm thinking how I'm going to ask this question, right? And my mother comes back on, and she goes, honey, your father thinks he's Walt Longmire. Now, those of you who read my books know how far apart those two characters are, right? So I'm trying to think how I'm going to answer that question, and I have no idea. And she comes back on the phone again, and she says, let's not disabuse him of that thought, shall we? So fortunately, my father, continued on till his death, to consider himself Walt Longmire, which I felt a little bit better about because I got an email from a reader in Canada who said, we all think we're Walt Longmire. You got to be kidding. And so it's not that big of a deal. But anyway, the book came out with Viking Penguin. It was very wonderful. And it was interesting because the president of Penguin, Catherine Court's the one that sat me down and slid the manuscript, between us of The Cold Dish and said, we would really like some more of these. We'd like some more of this. And I said, well, I'm happy to write you guys some more books. And she said, well, no, I don't think you understand. We would like some more of these. We think these characters, this place, these relationships, people are going to want more of this. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had one book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin. Saying, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that'll work. But I've got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And she said, well, why don't you go home and think about this? And so I did. And the big question was, okay, well, do these characters have more stories to tell? Do these voices have something more to say? And the answer came roaring back that yes, they did. I did want to have more to say like that. And so I'm actually on the 12th novel in the Walt Longmire series. I haven't looked back. I'm having the time of my life. I'm having more fun writing the 12th book than I did maybe the first book. But my relationship with libraries also remains extraordinarily healthy. I can tell you how it started. The very first library to get in touch with me was a little library over in the western part of Wyoming called Meeteetse, which is the meeting of the chiefs, for the Arapaho. And they called me, well, they actually wrote me an email when The Cold Dish first came out, and they said, we'd really like to have you come over and do a talk, on The Cold Dish. And I'd never been asked by a library to do anything other than shh. And so I thought, I'm going to do this. And I wrote them back, and I said, I'm happy to do that. Well, they wrote back, and they said, well, just so you know, we're just a little branch library here in Park County out of Cody, and we don't have a lot of money for honoraria or anything. And so I had to go quick look up what an honoraria was. And so I did, and I wrote him back, and I said, well, once you reach a certain level of literary notoriety, I said, it's very, very difficult to negotiate your own honoraria. I said, mine's the same as it's always been, a 6-pack of Rainier beer, cans preferred. And they wrote me back in 3 minutes and said, done. And the problem was that got in all the newspapers in Wyoming. And soon, subsequently, I've done all 63 of the libraries in Wyoming. Okay, and I haven't bought beer in about 7 years, so it's kind of worked out to be beneficial for both of us, to be honest with you. It's kind of funny, though, like that, because we also have this thing that we call Longmire Days that we do up in Buffalo, Wyoming. And what happens is that the entire cast of the television show Longmire all comes up, and about 14,000 of their closest friends. And it was kind of funny, though, like that, because we also had and Rainier Beer was actually one of the sponsors for that. And we also had one of the little books that I wrote, Spirit of Steamboat, was actually picked as like the state read for the state of Wyoming. I know here in Alabama, you've got like enough people in counties and in cities like that you can do city reads and county reads and all that. It takes all of us in Wyoming to band together to do one read. And so anyway, like they did Spirit of Steamboat, and I was actually down at the state library, and the state librarian comes out like that, and she gives me, and let me tell you how much librarians like bringing beer into their libraries. Like they wrap it up in brown paper with twine and packing tape and everything, so that by the time they're done, it looks like heroin or something like that. And so she brings this 18-pack out at the state library down at the state capitol and everything. She brings this thing out, she sits it down, and she looks at me and she goes, "This was really kind of hard to get." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know. It's kind of a blue-collar, working class beer. A lot of the bars don't carry it anymore and everything." And she goes, "No, you don't understand. The distributors had a hard time getting it." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know. If the bars don't carry it, then the distributors don't carry it." She says, "No, you still don't understand. They're out of beer." This was 2 weeks into Longmire, the TV show. And everybody saw Walt drinking Rainier Beer, and they all went out and bought it. And so I thought, you know what, this sounds a little funny. Maybe I should check it out. So I call up the national headquarters in Urbandale, California, and I said, "Hey, are you guys?" "We are out of beer. We are totally out of beer. We have been brewing this stuff since after Prohibition. We have had a spike in sales unlike we have ever had in our entire existence. And we're trying to figure out what it is that's happened, And so I tried to explain the whole situation to them. And they were very, very happy to be the shaken, not stirred, signature drink of the Wyoming sheriff, I have to say. But it's been a little bit weird, too, like that, because, with Hollywood, people always ask, how did you get involved with Hollywood? What happened? And what happened was Warner Brothers got in touch with me and said, hey, we'd like to make a TV show out of your books. And so it was really nice like that. And they've been really great to work with. And one of the first things they did was they made me a creative consultant on the TV show, which I kind of thought was just going to be a figurehead kind of thing. They really didn't want, my opinions on anything. Well, they did. Like that, they were down there in Southern California, and they only knew so much about, Northern Wyoming, the Northern Cheyenne tribe, all these different things, sheriffing and all these things. And so, anyway, like they actually, I guess the big shock was when they started asking me actual questions, and I was kind of stunned by that. But one of the first things they asked me about is they said, "Well, do you ever think of actors when you think of Walt Longmire?" And I said, "No, I've got friends and family and, people I work with and people I know, and those are all the people that I use as characters in my books." And they said, "Well, if you were to think of actors for Walt Longmire, who do you think of?" And I said, Joel McCrea, Ben Johnson, Gary Cooper, And they said that was no help at all because all those guys have been dead for 40 years. Okay, so I said, "Well, I'm not going to be much help to you guys. So you're kind of on your own on this kind of thing." And so I kind of forgot about it and didn't think it was anything kind of a big deal or anything. And it was funny like that because this FedEx package arrived from Warner Brothers when they were in the process of trying to make a pilot episode of the TV show. And the thing got there, and it was a whole box of DVDs of auditions for all these actors that they were thinking about casting as Walt Longmire. And so it was a blast, because my wife and I, we sit down there at the kitchen table like that, and I put the DVDs in the DVD player one by one, and we would watch all these actors, attempting to be Walt Longmire. And it was so funny like that because, you seeing those, those characters come to life on a screen is always, interesting. And I had a kind of a vested interest. I mean, there were two different ways they could go with this character. They could either go with somebody who was going to be a big name actor who would bring an audience, to the TV show, or they could go with somebody who was a relative unknown. And I was kind of rooting for the unknown like that. And there are problems with either one of these directions. The first one being that if you go with a big name author, big name actor, you guys know as well as I do that in Hollywood, if you got a character that has one of these on, there are about 6 actors that get that role over and over and over again. And they're all wonderful performers, but for my money, they've kind of gone to the well maybe one time too many. And so I was kind of, hoping that they would get somebody new that wouldn't carry the baggage of all these other cowboy roles that they had played. Well, the problem is that, Walt Longmire is not exactly a spring chicken. Walt is what I tend to refer to as over. He's overage, overweight, overly depressed, but he still gets up in the morning and does the job, so that to me makes him rather heroic. Well, the problem with that is that, any actor that's going to play Walt is going to have to be like at least in their 50s, right? Well, the problem with that is if you're in your 50s and you're still unknown in Hollywood, you might suck. And Hollywood is really nervous about the whole suck thing, really, they are. So anyway, when we're going through these DVDs, there's some really big name actors, and some actors I've never heard of before, and we're watching all these DVDs and watching these guys, and they're all doing good jobs, but I finally get to the last DVD. It was the very last one in the stack. And at the bottom, it said Robert Taylor. And I was like, well, they took my advice after all, didn't they? That joke does not play with the under 30-year-olds at all, I got to tell you. And so anyway, I popped the DVD in, and there were a couple of things I really liked about Robert Taylor right off the bat, some things I really, really enjoyed about him. And one of them being, he looked like he had miles on him. He had lines on his face. He's a big guy, rangy, but he looked like he had miles on him. And I liked that. I liked a lot of things about him. Then there were a couple other things about him. In the audition, he's going into this woman's house, is in the pilot episode of Longmire. And he's going into this woman's house, and it's the worst job in law enforcement. It's a notification of death. He's basically telling this woman that her husband is dead and that he's not coming home. And he's never been in this woman's house before. He's never met her before. And Robert Taylor was the only actor that did this. He took off his hat. And I was like, that's our guy right there. We don't have to teach him basic civility. His mom did the job, So I'm feeling really good about Robert Taylor at that point in time. And it was about then that this little voice piped up from behind me there at the kitchen table going, oh my. I turn around, I look at my wife, she goes, he's handsome. So I'm looking at the TV, and I'm looking at her, and I'm looking at the TV, and I'm looking at her, and she goes, he's kind of like a TV version of you, taller, better looking, with a better voice. I'm not as big of a fan of Robert Taylor as I used to be. But we're actually on our 12th novel in the Walt Longmire series, at the Netflix. I don't know if you guys know the whole story about what happened to us as far as the TV show is concerned, because we've actually made a jump. We were on another network, the network, and what happened was it was kind of interesting, because we were the highest rated scripted drama on this network's entire history. And what happened was, I don't know if you know the backstory on all of this, but what actually happened was there was a little bit of a, excuse the term, pissing contest between and Warner Brothers. And what they decided was they wanted to own the show. This network wanted to own the show because they figured they could make a lot more money out of it if they owned it. Warner Brothers are the guys that taught James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart how to be tough guys. Okay, so they're going to be a little bit troublesome to go up against. And they said, no, we're the highest rated scripted drama you've ever had, and we've got this show sold, in 100 different countries. Why in the world, would we sell it to you? And this network came back and said, well, if you don't sell it to us, we're going to cancel it. And I got to tell you that in my 5 years of experience with Hollywood, don't ever try and underestimate the intelligence of television executives, okay? Because they will do anything to cut their nose off to spite their face. So they did. They canceled the show. And it was kind of funny because there was a major uproar in social media with the Longmire posse and all this group of people that really got angry about the fact that this very popular television show had been canceled. And so it was rapidly turning into a PR nightmare. For this network. And so what they decided to do was they decided they would put a spin on it, which is, I guess, the thing to do nowadays. And so they came out and they said, well, the problem wasn't, the ratings for the TV show. The problem was that it wasn't drawing in the proper demographic. The 18 to 49-year-old demographic was the problem. Let me tell you who you do not want to piss off in this country. Everybody over 49, okay? Because... I'm a proud member. I got a card in my wallet. And, because the trouble with that is that most generally, if you're over 49, you've been to the rodeo and you've got your buckle and you're more than happy to tell everybody what you think. And boy, did they ever like that. And it rapidly turned into the biggest, PR nightmare that they've ever had. Like, and they had like about a 33% drop in their ratings, where people just said, okay, that's it, I'm done with this network. And the good news is we actually got picked up by Netflix, like that. And they actually start production of the 5th season of Longmire, actually, I believe this month. We kick back into production once again. And I'm pretty happy about that, I have to say, like that, because I've become pretty close friends with everybody that's involved with the TV show. But I also have to be honest and tell you that I'm always a little bit sorry for Hollywood. I got to be honest with you, because they do such an amazing job, and we have an incredible cast, incredible sets, incredible design, costumes, everything, screenwriters, all these fantastic people that do all these amazing jobs. But it's very difficult, for Hollywood to compete with a book. And the reason behind that is that, I, as an author, have this one incredible advantage. It's called your imagination. Because that's what I do. That's my job as an author, is to take all those words, and stack up those dominoes of your imagination. Set them all into place, and then just use just the right words. Not too many, not too few, but just the right ones to knock over that first domino of your imagination. And from there on, you do all my hard work for me. Thank you. Now, I promised that I would leave extra time for the Q&A portion of this talk. And the reason that I did that is because generally what I tend to do is tell stories to illustrate my answers to your questions. And so each time you ask a question, it takes me about 20 minutes to answer one, okay? So that means we have time for one question, okay? So I just want to throw that out there, and let you guys know, like that. But no, I'm just kidding. We'll answer questions for as long as you would like. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I've been to Las Vegas, New Mexico, but I've never been to Wyoming.
Uh-huh.
And so I'd be interested to know how that set was chosen and what are any differences, or is there anything about that bothers you that you're not filming it in Wyoming?
The easiest answer to that question is, have you ever been in Wyoming in March? If you were, you would know why we film in New Mexico. That's really the big thing. We were getting ready to leave, and it was just last week, it was something like, at one point in time, it got down below, 10 degrees below zero. And I'm down there feeding the horses and thinking, New Mexico sounds pretty good, But yeah, it's a lot of that. A lot of it is the weather patterns, Another thing is there's also, each state has its own, film and television, committee. That gets together like that, and what they do is they try and lure, different, production companies to come in and film feature films, television shows, and all that type of thing. And Longmire's a little tough like that because our production schedule is about 5 months long. It's 4 or 5 months long, and so it's kind of like maneuvers of the Eighth Army. I mean, they come in like that, and they're there, for like 4.5 months. And so they need some place that has, really stable weather patterns, number one. But then again, also there's a lot of competition between a lot of these state film commissions, and a lot of times, it has to do with financial aspects of it. It also has to do, with the accessibility of sound stages, of crews, of all these different things. And so you have a lot of competition between these, and so the biggest graphic that I can give you on that is that. The New Mexico Film Commission has a standing staff, I think, of over 50 people that are involved with that commission. The Wyoming Film Commission, and one's an intern. So this one poor woman is up there trying to get people to come film in Wyoming. And so you really got to bring everything with you if you come to Wyoming. Because one of the things I love about Wyoming is one of the things that works against us in these type of situations, because there's really just, there's nothing there. No infrastructure to work with. And one of the advantages that they have down in Santa Fe, which is where the majority of the filming is done, they use the little tiny town of Las Vegas, New Mexico as the outside portion like that, but the majority of it is filmed, in and around a 100-mile radius of Santa Fe. And they've got these big, huge, sound stages, which is kind of interesting to know the history of. I don't know if you guys, do you remember a movie star by the name of Greer Garson? Yeah. Greer Garson, evidently after World War II got tired of being rained on and having bombs dropped on her and moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and bought 20 acres of land on the then outskirts of Santa Fe. Oh, that we should have all been so smart in 1948 as to have bought 20 acres on the then outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Well, the thing was, she was still making a lot of movies, but she was getting tired of flying back and forth between Los Angeles and Santa Fe. And so she bought those 20 acres and built a soundstage. And there are 3 of them now like that, but one of those sound stages holds all of the interiors that you see in the entire series of Longmire. And so, whenever you walk into that place, the first thing you see is a great big portrait, of Greer Garson, which is really kind of wonderful to have that kind of connection to go back to. But no, I'm really kind of pleased. My grandparents lived in Hobbs, New Mexico. And so, for me, which is kind of like the New Mexico version of Ucross, because you can always go to New Mexicans and go, yeah, my grandparents live in Hobbs, and their first response will be, where in the heck is that? But anyway, I really don't have any problem with the fact that we film, in New Mexico. I don't have any problem with that in the least. It's a very gracious state, and they do a wonderful job for us, I have to admit. Now, you see, this is why we can only answer one question. And so, anyway, somebody else got a question? Anybody else out here? Yes, ma'am.
Did you always think you were a writer and used your writing skill in an earlier life?
Was I always a writer? Did I always think of myself as a writer? Thinking of yourself as a writer is kind of like thinking of yourself as an astronaut, though, I mean, the odds are so great against you, that you think there's just no way this is ever going to happen or anything. And so what I did was I had more of a Jack Kerouac pinball method of self-realization, where I lived in a half-ton pickup truck and drove around all over the country, just doing every type of job. I worked construction, I rodeoed, I did just about everything you can possibly think of. And I think that, in the long run, that was probably one of the best training grounds as an author I could have possibly had. Because all of my favorite authors are a lot of those big, the authors that that deal with very large social issues, but they were very smart about it. They dealt with them on a very human scale. The Dickenses, the Steinbecks. We were talking about Harper Lee just last night. They knew that you could talk about these big issues like truth and liberty and justice and all these things, but those are just abstracts. I can tell you about the horrors of the French Revolution, or I can tell you about a woman sitting at the base of the guillotine knitting family crests into an Afghan. Well, now which part is going to have the largest scale effect on you? So for me, it was a kind of an easy transition to go from telling stories into writing stories, and to not let the writing get in the way of the telling of those stories like that. And one of the guys that gave me that piece of advice was a fellow by the name, it's a little lesser known mystery author you probably never heard of, by the name of Tony Hillerman. I had dinner with Tony. I was very fortunate to have dinner with Tony Hillerman, and one of the things he said to me was, I was working on my second book, and wondering how the heck, he did what he did, because he was working on his 20th or something like that. And I remember asking him, and he said, don't forget to tell a good story. Don't let anything get in the way of telling a good story. You've sat on enough rocking chairs on enough front porches snapping green beans, and you've crouched over enough hunting fires at night, telling stories. You know what a good story sounds like. Don't let anything get in the way of telling that good story. And that's kind of the way I approach the books. I kind of approach the books in the sense that, in a lot of ways, I don't want you to even remember that you're reading a book. George Guidall, was one of the guys that does the audio versions of my books. And one of the things he said, was, why I like your books? And I said, no, what's that? And he said, because you don't use the tag phrases, he said, she said. He said, you leave those out. You'll use a physical description, like he adjusted his hat or he touched his watch or something like that, to let me know which character it is that's speaking. And for George, I can understand that, because basically when he does a book, he's doing a 350, 400-page monologue is what he's doing. Because my books are written in first person. So in many ways, what I want it to be almost as if you were to come into the Busy Bee Cafe on the main street of Durant, Wyoming, and sit down on a stool there, and Walt Longmire was to come in and sit down next to you and lean over to you and go, let me tell you about what happened to me last month. From that moment in time, I don't want you to even remember that you're reading a book. I want you to fall into that world and be a part of that world. And that's a constant challenge for me, as a writer, to continue on with it. Hopefully I'm getting better. You always hope that you're getting better at what you're doing. So, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I love the relationship between Walt and his daughter.
Have you guys met my sister over here? Have you guys? case you're wondering how to start a question, that's how you start it, okay? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious about, well, I love the relationships between all of, among all the characters, but particularly those, Walt and his daughter, and there were a couple of times when it moved me to tears. So how did that relationship start, or at what point did you know that he needed to have a daughter and so forth?
It's kind of funny like that because the construction of the books themselves, my wife laughs about it because she tends to refer to my books as women's issues books thinly disguised as men's adventure novels. Which is why I don't let her talk at events like this. But for me, like that's kind of like the cycle of things. I mean, I have to admit, like I've got a mother, like a lot of people, and but I've also got 2 daughters, a granddaughter, and a wife, like and so I'm, and if you look at the construction of the books, in many ways, like and obviously the core element, is Walt and Henry. That friendship between these 2 individuals. The 2 major, components of the society and the culture of the American West, are, the mainstream white society, and then the Indian society. And I do say Indian, I don't say Native American because all of my Northern Cheyenne and Crow buddies make fun of me whenever I try and be politically correct and say Native American. They always look at me and go, "Where were you born?" And I said, "Well, I was born in America." "So you would be a Native American too, then, wouldn't you?" But they're kind of the core, to these, because I wanted 2 individuals who were going to be emblematic of these 2 cultures like that. But from there, you look out, and the entire series of books is completely surrounded by really strong-willed, very intelligent, and incredibly, to me, interesting female characters. Because to be honest with you, that's kind of what we men are surrounded by, whether we admit it or not, And so, for me, it's kind of fun like that to have those relationships, with Walt, because each one of the female characters in the books, provides a very specific, aspect of Walt's character. When you break it all down, like you can go through the whole list of all the female characters in the books. I mean, when you look at it, there's Ruby, the dispatcher, for the sheriff's department, who basically puts all the Post-its, on Walt's door facing, so that when he comes in the morning, he can collect those Post-its and know what it is he's supposed to do that day. So she's kind of responsible for the structure of his life. Then you've got Dorothy down over the hill at the Busy Bee Cafe, and anybody who's in small town law enforcement will tell you, if you want to know anything, all you have to do is go to the bars and the cafes, because that's where everybody talks. Like that. So she's the conduit, to the entire community. And then, you've got, the daughter, you've got Katie, like that, who is really kind of the last emotional connection that Walt has, with humanity. With the death of his wife, something that he's never really going to get over. He's going to carry that with him for the rest of his life. The one connection that he has to humanity is that daughter. And I think that's, an essential part of all of the books, to be honest with you. That relationship is seminal in so many ways. Like that. And then there's another character, of course, like that comes after that, which is Victoria Moretti, like that, the undersheriff in the books, like that, which is an interesting character in the sense that she's a very urban voice, what in otherwise, are very rural books. And she's an interesting character too, in the sense that she provides something for Walt that's very different than a lot of the other characters. In the sense that I knew that she was going to be a construct, in the sense that if the sheriff was going to be male, the undersheriff was going to be female. If the sheriff was going to be rural, the undersheriff would be urban. If Walt was knowledgeable about the social implications of the job and knowing the county and knowing the histories and the families and all this, well, then she would be more knowledgeable about the technical aspects of the job, know more about forensics, more about, the ballistics, all these type of things, because she went to the 6th largest police, academy in the United States. If Walt is very careful about the type of language that he uses, Vic is careful in a different way. And for me, that's one of the joys, is discovering those voices within those characters and seeing what they lead to as far as those relationships are concerned. But that emotional touchstone is always very easy for me to find, because I have 2 daughters and I have a granddaughter who is pretty much the center of my universe right now, and so it's an easy thing to tap into. So. Somebody else? I told you 20 minutes for each answer. I wanted to warn you now. So, anybody else? Any more questions? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I'd like to say my husband goes to Netflix every day to see if
Good.
Watch it and love it. Your humor is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
The books, do you find that do you place that same humor, or how do you handle that part of your personality as you write the book?
Oh, I think that she was asking like the humor in the books, like how much humor there is in the books, and I guess in comparison with a television show, there's a lot more humor I think probably in the books simply because the books are written in first person, and so you're kind of like in Walt's head, for 400 pages, and a lot of the humor tends to be Walt's worldview. Of the world around him, like that. But for me, the humor is so essential simply because anybody that's ever had a tough job knows that's how you kind of get through the day. I mean, I can always tell when I'm reading somebody's crime fiction if they've never been around cops because their characters are so serious. It's like we've got to break the big case. We have to break the big case. And all that. I'm like, no, that's not really the way it is. Like, generally you ask yourself the same questions everybody else asks. Do these uniform pants make me look fat? Do I have any food in the refrigerator when I get home this weekend? All those things like that are essential like that because to me. One of the higher factions like that you're going to use like that, because I get that question a lot when I'm doing workshops with young authors, and one of the first things they'll say, well, how do you get people to empathize with the characters? How do you get people to connect with the characters? And I always say, give them a sense of humor. Give them a sense of humor. Like, now, who do you love being around? Who do you like hanging around with? The people that make you laugh. And then their answer is usually, well, what if I'm not funny? And then you're like, well, you're screwed. Really. But, that to me is a lot of the essence, of the storyline. Like, it's simply because, and the way I use a lot of the humor in the books also is like with my Indian friends. Like, I don't think there's ever been a group of individuals that's been more maligned as not having a sense of humor as much as the American Indian. They're always portrayed as these stoic cigar store how, kind of characters. That's not the Indians I know. The Indians I know work on about 17 different layers of irony. And if you are not aware of that irony, you get to be the butt of that irony, okay? So I'm very careful about that kind of thing. Well, to give you an example, it can sometimes be a very dry, sense of humor. I had Men's Journal came out and wanted to do a profile piece. And so I brought them out and they were there at the ranch. And they said, well, we'd like to go up on the reservation and go up and do some photographs up there with some of the people and everything. And I said, sure, no problem. So I call up my buddy Marcus Red Thunder, who's kind of the model for Henry in the books, and I bring him up, and he says, well, I'll get in touch with Charles Little Old Man, and Charles is actually the chief of the Northern Cheyenne tribe, and the reason he got that job was because he fell asleep in one of the meetings and couldn't defend himself. And anyway, Charles said, oh, yeah, let's take them up on the ridge. There's this one specific ridge, Blacktooth Ridge, and he says, and it's got, ancient teepee rings that are over 1,000 years old. And he said, we'll take them up there, And so we brought him up there, and we get up there. Well, now Charles is 92 years old, okay? And the wind is blowing at 40 miles an hour, up on the top of this ridge, okay? I mean, literally, this little 92-year-old guy is standing there, and his pigtails are sticking out the back of his head straight out, and so we're all standing there, and this one guy walks over to Charles. And Charles has got his full-blown, noble savage thing on. He's the photographer's there, and Charles is doing a lot of this stuff, So I'm watching him and the pigtails are sticking straight out like this, and so this is one of the interviewers goes over, this reporter and he goes over to Charles and he goes, how do you get used to the wind? And Charles looks at him and goes, what wind? Yes, sir.
What could possibly draw your family from West Virginia to Buffalo Wild?
Actually, one of my whole family. It was just me. And I'm the one that was bouncing around all over the place, all these different places. And so, I basically, like I was saying, I spent a lot of time out west, because I had a grandfather who was a blacksmith. And one of the things I rapidly learned is that you could be a cowboy, but you could be a cowboy who was employed a lot longer if you were also a blacksmith. So I did a lot of shoeing, which led, into, more, rough stock events, which I started doing too, and bounced around a lot of different places like that. And there was one time when I delivered horses down into Ucross. We euphemistically refer to it as the UCLA area, Ucross, Claremont, Leiter, and Arvada. And it has a coal collection population approximately about 350 people. But I just delivered horses down there, and it's the confluence of the Clear and Piney Creeks, right there at the base of the Bighorn Mountains. And I just thought, boy, if I ever got the chance, this might be where it is I want to build my ranch. Like, because my father had built his place, my grandfather had built his, and I thought this would be a good place to do it, and so that's how I kind of ended up in a little town of 25, to be honest. So, yes, sir.
Fred, you obviously are the total definitive storyteller, and I'm wondering whether you enjoy writing about Walt more or talking about him.
Obviously, this man is drunk and needs to be taken from the room. Security, I like writing about him. I gotta admit. I enjoy doing events like this. It's always funny because I get finished and somebody's always say, "You look like you're having a good time." Like, I am. I do have a good time. This is the kind of opportunity to be able to talk to the people that read your books. I always think about all the authors that never got that luxury. That never got a chance. Like, on my website, you go to my website, you hit the contact button, you go directly to me. Like that, you're talking to me. And I think that's important. I think it's important to be able to converse and to talk with the people that are reading your books. That's one of the great joys of my life. But what I really enjoy doing, and this is like at the point of psychoses, in all honesty, here you got a bunch of really wonderful authors here this weekend. And basically what we do is go into an empty room and type about our imaginary friends, okay? So if you were right-minded, you would lock the door and not let us out, really, if you want to know the truth, like that. But I really enjoy just sitting down with Walt, and spending time with him, like that. I really do, like that. And I haven't gotten tired of that. I have to say, quite honestly. When I first started out, I'll finish up, with one quick story here, like that. Whenever I got started, I was a little nervous about a lot of different aspects, about the books, things that, that I could feel comfortable about writing and things that I didn't feel comfortable about writing. And there's always people that give you advice when you first start out as an author. And one of the pieces of advice that a lot of authors gave me, like, and I'm going to talk about the two things like that make people nervous, like that. The first one was pets. One of the first things they said was, "It wasn't the answer you thought I was going to give, was it?" They said, "Well, you can't give your protagonist any pets because then you're going to forget to take care of them, or something's going to happen like that, and it won't work out very well like that." And I thought, what, that's crap like that, because to be honest with you, I've got a whole ranch full of animals. I don't see why Walt can't take care of one dog, And the other thing is like, basically what I'm talking about is an armed man who drives around Wyoming, okay? And I thought, well, I could either have him talk to himself or I could have him talk to the dog. And I don't know about you guys, but people that are armed and talk to themselves worry me. And so, I thought, well, maybe if he talks to the dog, this will be a good thing. And so it actually turned out to be one of the stronger characters, in the entire series of books, the dog is, because it enabled me to write scenes like the one in The Dark Horse, where Walt basically gets out of the truck, and he gets ready to close the door, and he looks at the dog, and he says, "Stay in the truck and don't play with the radio." And then he shuts the door and takes 2 steps, and he says to himself, it was our private joke. He knew he could play with the radio if he wanted to. But there are other hurdles, there are other hurdles that you run into, when you're starting out too, like in the sense that I remember one of the pieces of advice that everybody gave me was, they said, well, you can have sexual tension in your books, but you can't have anything happen until like 17 or 18 books into the series or something like that. And the only thing I could think was, what kind of women are you dating anyway? So, like third book, I had these characters, Vic and Walt, and they're in this strangers in a strange land kind of thing where they're in Philadelphia. Kindness goes unpunished, the third book in the series. And so I had something happen, and I had it, it was an accident, the way these things do happen between two friends. And it was this accidental thing where they had sex. And it was, for me, the joy of writing it is that I had their responses be very opposite, gender opposite. Walt's, response is, that was a big mistake. He had a very, quintessential female response to two friends having sex, where he's like, we will never do that again. That was a big mistake, and we're not going to do that ever again. And Vic's response was more the stereotypical male response, where she was like, it was just sex. Why are you being so weird, What's wrong with you anyway? But I got to be honest with you and tell you what a coward I am, in that, when I wrote this, my very first sex scene, it was 3 sentences long. That was it. I was in there and out, and that was a poor choice of words, wasn't it? Anyway, it was 3 sentences long. That was it. It's 3 sentences. That was it, And so anyway, I'm on tour with that book, and I'm out in Olympia, Washington. And I'm doing the talk. Like, it's the Q&A part. Like, and there's this lovely woman sitting in the front row, and she's dying to ask a question, just dying to ask a question. I'm thinking, oh boy, okay. So I'm thinking, okay, like, and I said, yes, ma'am. Like, and she goes, that sex scene. I want to ask you a question. That sex scene in Kindness Goes Unpunished. Like, and I was like, all right, here we go. Like, and I said, yes, ma'am. She goes, it went on forever. So I looked at her and I said, I broke the news to her. I'm like, well, it actually was only, 3 sentences long, like that, And she starts turning kind of red, like that a little bit, and everybody's laughing, like that. And I looked at her and I said, how many times did you read it? She was tough. She came back. She goes, I read it a bunch of times. Like, so I felt kind of vindicated at that point. Like, thank you so much.